Well, hello everyone. Today it is December 16th, 2021, and we will have the second part of the Art and Science of Publishing in Scholarly Venues seminar. I am Halim Yanikomeroglu from Systems and Computer Engineering at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. I just wrote on this page when I obtained my degrees, basically trying to say that I have been in the system for quite a while. I have been a faculty member for more than 23 years at Carleton. And if you start my research career from my master's, which started in 1990, so I have been more than 30 years in the system. Therefore, lots of things I have seen, and it is an sharing the experience, actually, seminar series of Carleton University. We had the first part of this about a month ago. There we discussed the general context and dynamics, like bibliometrics, how difficult the competition has become, citations and things of that sort. That is an important discussion by itself, and I got quite nice remarks after that presentation. That presentation is available at my YouTube channel. If you just in YouTube write my name, it will take you to my channel, and in particular that talk's URL is given there. For instance, one remark we made was that citations is very much discipline specific. I was this morning checking Google Scholar. There are about 80 researchers listed in Google Scholar under machine learning who have more than 100,000 citations each, 80 people. Then I did the same for AI, or more precisely, artificial intelligence, about 40 people. Some of them may be put under both categories, but clearly, very easily, more than 100 people, maybe well more than 100 people who have been working in AI and ML have citations more than 100,000. This doesn't happen in any other field. So it is not an apple-to-apple competition. At the very least, one should look at these numbers within the framework of a particular discipline. Anyhow, this is a very big discussion. I don't want to get back to that. We already had quite some discussion there. So today, I will focus on strategies for successful outcome in publishing. And my agenda has 5 headings: what happens before the submission, during the review, or once the review results are out, how you do the revision, after acceptance, hopefully that is a, of course, favorable outcome, and finally, concluding remarks. I would very much appreciate your comments and remarks. In particular, if you have other viewpoints, let us make this a more engaging discussion. I'm planning to wrap it up by noon Ottawa time. Yes. Here are the 5 remarks that I made in the first talk. I just put them here and I will go through them again very quickly. Good research is necessary, obviously. If there is no good research, there is no discussion. But the point is, often it is not sufficient. And today I will not be talking about how to do good research. That is even a much bigger topic by itself. But I will focus mainly on publishing. So you do your good research. That's an extremely important start, but there is still a lot for you to have the paper get published. Second remark is that my experience is limited to IEEE community. Well, IEEE community is already very large, you know, so many societies, so many publications, and I have published in a very high number of different journals within IEEE. Nevertheless, each community has its own dynamics. So keep in mind that I'm talking mainly with this IEEE background. My views are based on my personal experience, as I mentioned, at different levels, as an author, as a reviewer, as an editor. But it should be remarked that there is really no single winning strategy. There are other strategies and viewpoints may exist. And to make the situation more complicated, these different modes of operation might look even conflicting. So an important advice to especially students is that they should consult with their supervisors and do whatever is appropriate after that consultation. And final remark is that what I have in mind as an audience is a typically good researcher. Pretty much you and I, we are good researchers. We care about research. We give importance to research, but not necessarily, we are not necessarily geniuses. If I spend a lot of time on this in the first talk, if you are really at the very end, at the very tail of the IQ and talent and skill set distribution, you know, 1 in 100,000, then many things I say here may not be applicable to you, or even you should not do things that I will be saying, because I'm saying things to people like me, once again, good researchers. Very special cases require very special action points. Let us move on. So here are a number of items to keep in mind before submitting a paper. And even before the paper, a few generic remarks on research. Let us keep in mind that we are professionals in research, not amateurs. It is very much like playing sports. If we are playing soccer, it has to be taken into account. Is this an amateur league? Just me and my friends, just to have fun and do some exercise, a Saturday afternoon playing together, or it is competitive. If it is professional, stakes are high. It is not a weekend activity. It should be fun, but it is much more than being fun. Everyone here, as far as I know, we are career researchers. So we do research. Research should be fun, but we do not do research for fun. It is a very serious matter. And that should always be kept in mind. Furthermore, given its importance in our careers as researchers, so either here everyone, either a faculty member or a graduate student or a research associate, postdoctoral fellow, or an industrial researcher. So at the end of the day, research is what we do. That is our job. As such, it cannot be a seasonal task. This is especially for those of us in academia. For instance, I might be saying that, or a faculty member, well, you know, this semester I have high teaching load. As such, the next 4 months, I just do my teaching, and then summer, I'll move to research. That is not a good strategy. Again, remember, we are professionals. In our career, we can't have a 4-month stop. So the circumstances may necessitate slowing down. Life is complex. We have other tasks, family issues, this and that. But if at all possible, research should not come to a complete stop. This point is rather important because when it comes to a stop, psychologically, it may take time or it might be difficult to restart. So if necessary, slow down, but don't bring it to a complete stop. Moving to another point, it is also extremely important that you should enjoy what you are doing. Research is not a 9-to-5 job. It is creative work. So like any other creative work, we work extended hours whenever inspiration comes. Even we do other chores, whether it is cooking or driving, other things. This research is consciously or subconsciously at the back of our minds. We should better enjoy that. If it is not, basically, it might be depressing. First and foremost, from payment viewpoint, in Ontario, work week is, now I'm trying to remember, I guess it is 37.5 hours. But I'm just looking at, my working schedule. It is close to 24/7. And I hardly take any day off during the year, just maybe 2 days, the first days of 2/8, and very special circumstances. But other than that, it might be a few hours, not the whole day, but I always do research. This is the nature of my job. So if you just divide your payment to the number of hours you work, it will become immediately a very low payment, and that itself might be very depressing. So the bottom line is you really have to enjoy this. And if you don't enjoy, that's not the end of life. There are many other career opportunities. You should find something that you enjoy. Likewise, you should really value your research. If you do not value what you do, it shows itself very quickly. And I'm just telling the obvious. If I understand that the person who is presenting his or her research to me does not value his or her research, then who am I to judge? I would say that you know your work best. And if you don't value, well, it means that it is not valuable. End of story. But if you value it, then from the way you speak, from your ambition and motivation, it shows itself, and it is a very important first impression. Just changing the topic a little bit here. Every researcher, especially seasoned ones like myself, faculty members, in my view, they should have core research areas that they stay in those areas long-term. They produce over years a portfolio of papers, like 10 papers, even tens of papers in the same area from different angles. Each paper becomes a building block, and by that, pupils start associating your name to that area. And also, you develop deep insight in that area. You cannot really develop those deep insights by just writing one paper. Having said that, things are changing very rapidly in technology. One should also be monitoring new emerging areas. So a good strategy is your research enterprise. Part of it should be those core areas that you have invested for a very long time. You are an expert in those areas, and some others you are trying to learn and understand. And for whatever reason, you may not want to follow up some of those areas, but in some cases, you like or you end up producing good results. So some experimental area for you may over time become a core area. Let me pause here for a second. Are there any remarks or questions? Okay. Now, from research to research output or outcome, in particular in academia, the most important outcome is a peer-reviewed paper. The importance of a paper cannot be emphasized enough. In industry, there are obviously other possible outcomes, including patents and prototypes and so on. But in academia, mainly research papers are the main outcomes. And this is true for every researcher. Whether you are in the system for long, like me, or you are just a master's student starting your research career, people who assess you or me will expect these outcomes. So when I apply for a grant and present my CV, the panel will check, okay, what I have done in the last at least 5-6 years, and the major outcome is again papers. Then if you are a master's student going for a defense, there as well, the committee will want to see at least one paper from your work. So once again, this is a very important deliverable. As such, we can't really dismiss. So a student cannot say that, or should not say that, well, the last year I really learned a lot. I read this, I read whatever, and so on. That's all good. But what is the outcome, tangible outcome? Tangible outcome is a paper. From all those things you have studied and learned, you could have at least produced a short paper, like an exercise. Now you think that you developed ML skills last year. Why didn't you use those ML skills in your core expertise, say wireless communications, apply deep learning on resource management? Wouldn't that be appropriate? Of course, it would have been. So every semester, every 6 months, every year, you should look back, you should make an account of, once again, your last semester or half year or full year, and these deliverables should be there. If you are working for industry, at least, or if we were a consulting company, right, you do a piece of work, it is only appropriate to write a report about that. So that report in our context is a paper. If there is no paper, that is really not good news for any researcher. Once again, it is not good news for me. It is not good news for a junior researcher. Next, some people delay a paper unnecessarily for a variety of reasons. So we have already discussed in the first bullet that we shouldn't bring research to full stop, even if the circumstances are not very favorable. I'm not talking about that. So you care about research, you do research, and still the paper is not coming out. It needs an assessment. Why is that? In many cases, the reason turns out that the author is not fully satisfied with the product. Now, this happens more often in the context of a more junior researcher, because she would have less experience, and the supervisor should fill in such situations. It might be true that the paper is really not ready. So if that is the case, certainly more work is needed, more analysis is needed, so on and so forth. So I'm not saying or suggesting at all to submit an unfinished paper. That's absolutely not the message. But the message is that no paper is complete. We always read and learn from each other's work, and we build accordingly. Each paper is a brick on the wall of a building. You can't make a building in one shot. I always give this example to my students. In communications, especially when it comes to signal processing and digital communications, the foundational dynamics. One of the most important papers in the history of this area, perhaps the most important paper, is Shannon's work in late 40s, and on channel capacity and so on. And that work is a Shannon's channel coding theorem is a non-constructive existence theorem. That is, Shannon does not tell you how to reach the channel capacity. It tells you that this channel capacity formulation, under no circumstances you can exceed the channel capacity, but the paper, his work, doesn't tell you how to reach or approach channel capacity. Now, take that seminal paper, again, arguably the most important paper in our circles in the last 70 years. One might argue that that paper is not complete. Why? Because it doesn't give a tangible example. A reviewer could have said to Shannon, well, go and produce a channel code, and then Shannon perhaps can invent block codes or convolutional codes, but still it will be several dB away from channel capacity. Basically, you know the storyline. It took decades and decades to come up with signal processing techniques at the transmitter and at the receiver to construct capacity achieving codes. So no work is complete in that sense. At some point, you should make the judgment if it is a self-contained work, if there is sufficient new material information that will be useful to the community, then the work is ready for submission. Also, sometimes the students, especially young researchers, put the bar unnecessarily high. Yes, we want to have very good papers, but not every paper is seminal. In a typical issue of, say, IEEE transactions on wireless communications, it is a journal that is very familiar to me in my area. In a typical month, there would be around 50 papers. So in a year, 50 times 12, 600 papers. And then just, think in the last year, in 2021, out of those 600 papers published in 12 issues of Transactions on Wireless Communications, how many of them are or can be in that seminal category? Groundbreaking, really shaking the community. Maybe none of them. So it is an unnecessarily unnecessary and unrealistic target to expect a paper to be groundbreaking. If it happens to be groundbreaking, awesome, bingo. But you know, it can't be the case. We should also accept that. Once again, we obviously target good papers, very good papers, but we should understand that not every paper can be groundbreaking. Next point, where to submit. My advice would be to pick a good venue. I will leave the definition of good venue to you. This is, I know, subjective. If I list the good venues in, you know, I have in mind, and you do your list, I assume they will overlap, but there will be things in your list that wouldn't be in my list, and vice versa. So that is up to you how to produce your list. But at least in your view, these should be good venues. When it comes to journals, because when it comes to conferences, there are other factors. Before the pandemic, conference publications meant traveling, and there might be just a local event in town, or we are in Ottawa, in Montreal, a day trip is possible, convenient, cost efficient. I think one can submit the paper there, or there might be a national conference that it may not be a top international event. Nevertheless, you may want to support that event. It might be a university workshop, and we may want to support that again. So those conferences, workshops, it is a bit different dynamics. But when it comes to the general category of journals, it is good to publish in good venues so that you are proud of your track record. I sometimes see in CVs the authors put as CSI index papers and then other journal papers. So why there is that other category? You know, if you are by that, you are creating the impression that these are not that important papers, and if that's the case, why you published in those venues? Once again, giving the impression that your assessment of your work is that it wasn't good enough, therefore you submitted to a second tier, third tier venue. That is not a good strategy in my mind. And then when it comes to general journals category, there are very many different types of journals, or maybe I should even call this periodicals, because literally speaking, journal is a specific category of a periodical. And it is, there is a subtle difference from transactions. Transactions would be in a main discipline, for instance, transactions on communications, transactions on wireless communications, and so on. But you might have Internet of Things journal. Internet of Things is a more confined topic, and often the term journal is used in those cases. But in regards to quality and scope, I think for all practical purposes, they are equivalent. And then there are magazines. These are more accessible papers with limited or no equations. It is giving a general view of an emerging area. Then there are short contributions, very focused on an aspect of a problem. These would be letters. There are survey and tutorial type of papers, or periodicals I meant. More recently, open journals are becoming very popular within IEEE and elsewhere. and so on. And then there are conferences and workshops, so on and so forth. I know that people have different views on these different periodical categories. Impact factor is a bibliometric that tells a lot of information. That is how likely that journal is to collect citations, and that is important, obviously. But in that sense, accessible periodicals will naturally collect more citations. Therefore, their impact factor can be higher than journals or transactions. There are many, or not many, but there are magazines which have impact factors around 10, but that 10 impact factor of 10 would be a very high value for a transactions or journal type of periodical. When it comes to surveys and tutorials, especially IEEE communication surveys and tutorials, its impact factor is just extremely high. If my recollection is correct, around 23. And if I remember correctly, communication surveys and tutorials is the periodical with the highest impact factor published in IEEE Explore portal. Now, due to this stress of impact factor and citations, we discussed a lot on these in part one. Many researchers just give priority to magazine type or overview type of papers. That is more accessible papers. I very highly value those accessible papers. And I think in our group, we have expertise in that area. However, keep in mind that when it comes to scholarly contributions, that is advancing a field technically, it is transaction and journals. So in the publications portfolio of a junior researcher, a researcher in training, that is in particular PhD students, it is very important to have transactions and similar type of papers which are rich in analytical content, and those papers really advance the field. Even if the impact factor of that transactions is low or rather low, and the paper may not have the opportunity to collect a very high number of citations because it is written for people in the community and that number would be limited, that's okay. Transactions papers are very valuable. And I think it is a must in my view to see one or several transactions type paper in the publications portfolio of especially a PhD student. Let me pause there for a quick minute. Any questions or comments? Okay, so let us move on. Now, when it comes to writing a good paper, now I am actually unable to monitor the chat box. Just let me open this one. Anastasia, what is your opinion on open journals of societies? Yes, so I guess, just a quick background, Anastasia. Many federal funding agencies, especially in Europe, European Commission, for instance, when research is supported by public funds, a number of years ago, they started requesting that the publications should be accessible to everyone. And, you know, if you take IEEE journals, they are not accessible unless you have subscription or your institution has subscription to the portal. So this resulted in some issues. Therefore, now IEEE, all societies have these open journals, and many other publishers have open journals as well. I welcome this policy that research results become available to the general public. That is good news. Now, there is a perception in general about, I'm not talking about here IEEE alone, but in general, open journals also strive for reducing the time to publish, so a rather speedy review process, and that shouldn't hopefully jeopardize the quality of the review process. I don't want to present very hard opinions here. Maybe I am a little bit old school here. I value a thorough review process, and there's a compromise. In some journals and transactions, the review process is just unacceptably, notoriously long. You know, in some cases, you get the first results after 1 year. That is really unacceptable. On the other hand, in a few weeks, one may get review results from an open journal. This is all very good. So I think we should support open journals and work all together to make sure that their review process is as rigorous as other transactions and journals. Anastasia, is it okay, that answer? Or if there are other comments, please feel free to fire. Yes, so what I was saying in this bullet is that the onus is on authors. So don't expect that it will be an easy process to have your paper accepted, or the fact that you have a good idea, it is given that it would be accepted. Not necessarily, right? I mean, we have experienced this in a hard way, perhaps in a painful way. Put yourself in the shoes of a reviewer or the editor and ask, be hard on yourself. Why should this paper be accepted? I mean, the research results might be important, but it should be understandable. If you didn't present it in a convincing way, in an open way, the reviewers may not be able to, appreciate that, and that would be an immediate reason for rejection. So once again, it is your paper, it is your baby. If it does not get accepted, you will get hurt. Therefore, do your best. The onus is on you as the author. It is always easy to put the blame on others. Editor is stupid, the reviewer is stupid, so on and so forth. But I think you should also point the finger to yourself. Did you do anything and everything necessary to get this work accepted? And most of the time, the answer may not be a yes. So let us move on. There are some parts of the paper which are in particular very important, starting with title. If the title is very short, basically it cannot capture the contribution. You can only tell the area, for instance, radio resource management in device-to-device communications. Well, this is an area. This cannot be the title of a paper. There are hundreds of papers on radio resource management for device-to-device communications. So the title should capture the content of the paper. On the other hand, if it is very verbose, then it is discouraging to read. It is not eye-catching. It takes time to read and understand the title itself, let alone the paper. Long titles are not good either. So there's a compromise. Each word in the title should be there for a good reason. So really, literally, take the title and apart from articles and so on and so forth, the actual words, make a judgment. Is it necessary to have that word? And if it is necessary, is it the best word to capture what you have in mind? Another reason why titles are important is that, as we will discuss in a moment, a paper might need to be resubmitted, and if you have already uploaded the first submission to portals like Archive, then the same content will appear online with more than one title, which results in confusion in citations and so on. So in short, think about title very carefully. That effort is certainly worth it. Just pay attention how you read a paper. You wouldn't read every paper you see. I mean, even if you want to read, it would be impossible, right? So you make a decision on whether it is worth reading the paper or not. Reading a paper is a big investment. So how do you make that decision? What makes the paper appealing to you? Perhaps you will just go through the abstract quickly. So abstract should be engaging, and it should really give a real focus of the paper. One big problem about abstracts is that sometimes it might be over cheerful, as if it is a breakthrough. And then if the rest of the paper cannot come to that level, it immediately results in disappointment. And a disappointed reviewer will reject the paper. Let us keep that in mind. So abstract should be engaging, but realistic. And it should highlight some of the key contributions. Likewise, introduction and conclusion sections are the two sections that the reader would read for sure, even if he or she skims through the body of the paper, because the body will have lots of technical content, once again requires time and energy, but presumably introduction and conclusion sections will be more accessible. Therefore, they should be written with extra care. Also, when people look at a paper rather quickly, they would go through figures to understand the performance results. Figures should be self-descriptive, contained as much as possible. It would be great if I look at the figures, read the caption, and look at the key of the figure and understand what's going on without reading the text. So text can give additional information, but if the figure still as a self-contained entity, if it can present the results, that will be very, very helpful. So if, for instance, the key of the figure has lots of, abbreviations, algorithm, ZDKBJ, whatever, and then another algorithm with another alphabet soup, you just don't know what is going on. At the very least, if that is inevitable, put in brackets one of them as the proposed algorithm, so that the reader can see that, yes, there are 5, 6 curves in this figure, but this red one, the proposed, is the one that is basically the authors are devising, and it is better or worse in comparison to others. One can understand rather easily. The key messages in the paper should be repeated. Repetition is good in this sense. In any, in a book or in a speech, in a presentation, in a paper, key messages, the things that you want the reader to take as a take-home message, they have to be repeated. This is a good strategy. In the beginning, somewhere in the body, and at the end. Even not twice, perhaps 3 times. You should better outline the contributions of the paper explicitly. In my view, it is better that you do this and you don't leave this to the reader, because it will take quite a bit of effort on the reader's part, and in many cases, the reader may not be able to make that judgment properly unless she or he is right in the field. So it is better that you write it, if possible, in terms of bullets. Now, the important point about contributions is that it is very easy to overclaim. That is trying to get credit, and subconsciously, most of the time, subconsciously, say things which already probably do exist in the literature. I think especially for junior researchers, there is this insecurity that the contribution should be big. Just the opposite, as we were discussing minutes ago, a seminal paper, a breakthrough paper is an exceptional case. Most papers, the contribution will be small. So as long as there is a contribution, but you should defend that small contribution very strongly. You should be able to fight for that. What you need to do is to write it very clearly. It doesn't matter that if it is small, as long as it is novel, as long as it is adding something new to the field, that is what is expected. And obviously you shouldn't underclaim either. That would be injustice to your own work. Next, the paper should have a logical flow. The ideas should flow in a reasonable manner, to the extent that if I hide the next section, the subsequent section in the paper, from the present section, the reader should ask the appropriate questions so that the subsequent section should be addressing those issues. And that goes in the paragraph and sentence level. I write a paragraph, again, I hide the next paragraph, and if this paragraph that I'm not showing to you, if it addresses the questions that are raised in your mind from what you have read, then it is actually an excellent presentation. So this flow at the sentence level, at the paragraph level, and at the section level is very important. Now, here comes something that I give a lot of importance, my team members would know, and that is the syntax of the paper. Syntax is different than the language of the paper. That is, we write in English, and pretty much no one here in the audience, including me, as the presenter, English is not our first language. And reviewers are actually rather tolerant to imperfections in language. But when it comes to syntax, they are often non-forgiving or less forgiving. I guess less forgiving is the best word. So what I mean by syntax? Well, these are the rules of scholarly writing. You should be detailed oriented and basically consistent. Just let me give a few examples from references. If you, journal papers, for instance, you should make a decision. Will you write the month or not? Because you might be writing numbers. So if it is a monthly periodical, number 2 means that second issue, that is February. It is your call whether you write February or not. But if you write, you should write to all journal papers you are referencing. You can't do for some and not do for others. That is a syntax error. Also, are you writing February or Feb, F-E-B, for instance? Again, that is your call, but whatever you decide, it should be the same format for all journals. And if it is, 3-letter and dot, that is the format, you can't write sept, S-E-P-T for September. It should be S-E-P dot. If there is that T there, it is telling me as a reader that this is not, the author is not detail oriented. The author missed this point. So author easily misses details, which means that the author might miss many things in his or her software code. How can I trust the author's results? Because the author is not detailed oriented. Look at the section titles. The first word, so the first letter of each word. If section title, section A and B, those are in capital, section C, they are in lowercase. Again, not paying attention to detail. This has nothing to do with the fact that English is not your first language. This is about the scholarly attitude to writing. And it is, maybe I'm being too rough here, but I wouldn't, as a reviewer, I will not forgive that. So all these small rules of writing, very much like, these are very much like programming, commas and dots and so on, they should be put appropriately. So all these scholarly rules of writing must be obeyed very religiously, basically. Again, if you are writing something like a quantity and a unit, there has to be 1 unit of space between the number and the unit. The unit should not be in italic if it is in the text. If there is a symbol in the text, it should be in italic and things of that sort, right? If there is a equation as a highlighted equation, and if there is a dot at the end, it is like the preceding sentence is ending, which means that the sentence after that equation should start with a capital letter. If it is a lowercase letter, that's not good. You are not a detailed oriented researcher. You are not a real scholar, I'm afraid to say. Again, I'm being a bit harsh, but this is really how it is. And then the language issue. Language becomes especially important in overview or magazine type of papers, but in all papers as well. I have a lot to say here, especially junior researchers, like a student in his or her first or second paper may struggle. Now, a faculty member like me, who is extremely busy and so many papers are brewing in parallel, I wouldn't have time to correct your English errors. And let me give you a secret, my English is not perfect. Even if I attempt to correct, maybe it wouldn't be very good either. So it might be a good idea to have a professional editor and to get the paper edited for a fee. I often do that, and I think it is a very good investment. A paper is expensive anyway. Many journals have article processing charges. It might be a few hundreds of dollars to even more than $1,000, $2,000. If that is the expense, you can just pay a few $100s at most for a language editor. I think it's a good investment once again. I work with a very good professional editor for some of my papers, and I'm very happy for that. But an important point is that editors should not write the paper for you. That's a different business. So what we do is that we go through an internal review process as many times as necessary. And by the way, these professional editors, they are also not necessarily trained when it comes to syntax. So syntax is our internal job. And then we do our very best in regards to the language of the paper. Then send it to the editor. Editor works on the paper, and then he sends it back with suggestions. So editor does not make the corrections on the paper, but rather he put notes to the side, revise this sentence like this, or this sentence is not clear. Therefore, the manuscript coming back from the editor, the student, it is an extremely valuable educational experience for the student to rework on that paper based on the editor's comments. And if the student gets that type of feedback for 2 papers, most likely she or he will not need for the 3rd paper, because again, lots of points will become clear to the student. And then the final point, which I have already made earlier, and this is probably the most important point on this slide. See, the reviewer, and by extension, the readers, once the paper gets accepted, cannot really verify your work line by line. That is too much to expect. I mean, you would be extremely lucky and fortunate if someone reads your work extremely carefully and verifies your results and even your simulations, but that doesn't happen often. So the reader should have confidence in this work. You are reporting some simulation results. It is even difficult to explain the assumptions in the simulation, let alone sharing the code and things of that sort. So the reader should believe you. But why should the reader believe you? It is, again, your responsibility to give that confidence in your work. So I look at the work, I quickly skim through that. If I start seeing lots of errors, not necessarily in language, but in syntax, again, capital letters and lowercase letters, arbitrary. I'm just going on the same example. The name of the periodical in the references, sometimes it is in italic, sometimes it is not italic. This is telling me that this is perhaps either this is a rushed paper, or the writers are newbies. These are not experienced people. They really don't know how to write papers. These are not experienced researchers of the community. So how much I can rely on their simulation results, right? If I have If I have had the code, and if I spent 2 weeks to go through that code line by line, God knows how many errors I would detect, because these people are not careful people, right? So you know what I am trying to say. So try to, especially the first things that will be visible to the reader, try your very best. In particular, syntax, obvious issues, things should be in place, be detail-oriented. Then the reader will say that, look, whatever I can check, they are in order, they are in place. Therefore, I have reasons to think that the things that I cannot check should be correct as well. And if you can build that confidence, then the rest comes very smoothly. There's a comment, I guess, in the chat box. Do you recommend the professional editor to be knowledgeable in the field? Well, it would be excellent if that be the case, but I think that is too much to expect. It will be a big bonus, Fadi, if the editor is knowledgeable, but it is okay, and most of the time that would be the case if he or she is not knowledgeable. As such, she shouldn't work on the paper directly, because there is some field-specific expressions and so on. Linguistically, it might be awkward sounding, a word, an expression, but it might be used in the field, in the scholarly circles. So the editor might take a note again. Is this a word used in your circles and so on? And then you eventually make the judgment. Let me pause there again before now I go to another section in the presentation. If there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to address them. Another question in the chat box. Okay, so let us move on. Review results. So you submit your paper. There is a big expectation, you know, big investment, a lot of emotional attachment, and then results come out after a few weeks, few months, after a year in some rare cases, and most likely it will be a reject. The paper publishing became so competitive that hardly ever a paper gets accepted in the first try. And this becomes a very big shock for especially junior researchers. It is okay, you know, you can grieve for a day or two, but you should recover quickly. And this is not a joke, actually. Some junior researchers never recover. Very sad story. They have that rejection and they think that, you know, it's end of their research career. The community, you know, checked the work and it is very bad. Seldomly that might be the case, you know, really the work might be trash, but most likely the rejection happened for reasons other than that. So first and foremost, what is the meaning of a reject? This is not like a PhD thesis is rejected by the jury or the panel or the examination board. In that case, you know, the experts in the field, professors, read your work carefully and then you present it. There is a lot of back and forth. So there is an opportunity to explain the work. And despite all that, if it is rejected, and that doesn't happen very often, but it may happen, obviously it is a very strong message that shouldn't be taken lightly. But why does a paper get rejected? Well, reviewers may have done a lousy job, and then the editor is under pressure. Basically, you know, journals have very low rejection rates. Good journals receive good papers, but you can't accept every paper. In many cases, reviewers and editors are looking for reasons to reject a paper. So basically, a rejection does not necessarily mean that it is a poor, it is a substandard work. It needs some assessment, a very genuine and rational assessment why the paper is rejected. Now, let me move to the second bullet. The rules of the game has changed substantially over the years, especially in IEEE periodicals. This has been a complaint over the years. You know, some journals take literally, you know, it is maybe it is difficult for you to believe, but in the old days, some journals, it might take 2 years to get the first reply, the first review results, right? And over time, some new guidelines came. So it is an important key performance indicator of an editor to minimize what is called the time to publish. That is the time from the submission of a paper by the time it appears in the early view of IEEE Explore. If we give example from IEEE Explore, it may take several months, in some case more than a year, for the paper to find an issue. But that is a kind of a different story, because once the paper is in early view, or it's called, sorry, early access, I guess, early access, it already has a document number, DOI, document ID. Therefore, it is called published. This is kind of interesting. A paper is published when it appears in Explore's early access section. It doesn't have to be in an issue. So the time from the submission to the time it appears there, that time should be that shouldn't be long, because editor-in-chief is tracking that time to publish value for each editor, and if that becomes high for an editor, editor is flagged. So what do editors do is that in the old days, if a paper would need a lot of work, they would have given maybe a major revision for several months, let us say, but now they reject the paper right away. Because when the paper is resubmitted to the same journal with even a response letter, the clock starts ticking from 0. So in many cases, a reject in the new context in the last few years, this is comparable to a major revision in the old days. So I'm moving to the third sub-bullet. Look at the categories. There are easily 4 different categories of rejection. So there is the reject, and the editor explicitly says that you cannot resubmit. So this is a real hard reject. The door is pretty much closed. And then it might be reject, a kind of a neutral reject. If you want, it is your call, you can resubmit it to the same journal. And then there is reject, and the editor explicitly writes that this can be resubmitted with a response letter. So this is actually the old major revision. And in some cases, the editor may encourage you to resubmit. That is actually good news. So again, for a junior researcher, oh my goodness, my paper got rejected. But if the editor is encouraging you to resubmit, actually it is quite a good outcome in my view. And then it might be a major revision with different number of months, the fewer, the better, in the sense that it would be on the lower end of the major revision. And then there is the minor revision. And then there is a new category in many journals, except with mandatory revision, especially open journals. And you are given 2 weeks for that. This is a tricky situation because at the end of this, except with mandatory revision, that is after in 2 weeks you submit the manuscript, the editor will have to make a binary decision. There is a possibility that the paper might be rejected if the mandatory revision is not basically honored to the expectation of the reviewers. So sometimes minor revision is better than except with mandatory revision, because minor revision you are given more time. And then except is obviously the best outcome. But once again, except doesn't happen right away. It is at the very least after a long and tedious review process. And in some other cases, the paper may need to be reworked and resubmitted. So this next bullet, think carefully and rationally on the next steps, is important. I mean, of course, it doesn't make much sense to resubmit a paper over and over again. So you submit it, reject it, just you submit it almost as is to somewhere else. It is a waste of your time. It is unnecessarily stressing the system, taking reviewers' time, and all of that. So you should really try to read between the lines of the reviewers and the editors. If the comments are that, the contribution is really straightforward, trivial, things of that sort, perhaps you shouldn't have submitted the work there to start with. But if there are good hints or suggestions towards improving the paper, and then you have time and resources to implement those, and you are convinced that in the next cycle, the product will be of much better quality, then it only makes sense to continue with the review process. This assessment would be done better by a more experienced researcher because the student may not be able to read between the lines, especially in editors' verdict email. So here I am kind of giving you conflicting messages. On one end, I am encouraging you not to be down and try to resubmit the work, but only if that is the right decision, meaning that if, first of all, you have to believe in your work. Going back to a previous point, no work is a big breakthrough, but as long as you think that your work is increasing the state of the art tiny bit is sufficient. Maybe you were unable to explain your work properly. Do your diligence, improve the paper, do more analysis, remove redundant parts. Maybe there is too much literature review creating the impression that you are basically redoing what is well known. So whatever, do the necessary actions and resubmit the paper. Let us continue. Now, a few quick comments. I know that I don't have much time, but I am coming to an end anyway. Reviewers are not your enemies. Once again, this is an issue with junior researchers. They take the reviewers as if they are our enemies. That's not the case. Just relax, give the benefit of the doubt. You should be thankful to the reviewers. People take time from their busy schedules, read your work, and come up with some suggestions. If you don't, you may not agree with all those suggestions, right? That is also fine. That is also fair. And if you think that some reviewer remarks are quote unquote stupid, as some students say, actually that is good news, because the easiest reviewer comments that you can deal with are those stupid comments. Maybe you have said something several times, still the reviewer has missed that, then it's a very easy fix. You can point out that, okay, this is already mentioned in the introduction and at the section 4.d, and then you can just, again, take the responsibility on yourself. Perhaps it wasn't clear in the revised manuscript. We revise those statements for a better explanation or presentation. If you say that nicely, reviewer will be content, and then we move forward. So in many cases, the most annoying comments might be the easiest comments to deal with. Next, fighting with an anonymous reviewer is not a good strategy. You really don't know with whom you are fighting. And at the end of this fight, who is vulnerable? Obviously, you and I, who are the authors, right? So fight is not, it's not necessary to start with. It is not a good strategy. But if it is necessary, you know, if the reviewer is using some vocabulary which is inappropriate, or you just feel that this person is absolutely does not have the right background, you know, if in those extremely rare cases in which you want to go back, then don't go back to the reviewer. You go back to the editor. So if you want to escalate the situation, the rule of thumb is do not escalate with the reviewer, anonymous reviewer. Escalate a dispute with the editor. You know, reviewers might be careless, inexperienced, in part due to the fact that they are anonymous. They might say things casually, but editor in a reputable journal is supposed to be an expert in the field. Her name, his name is there. And often they are also very, they have a lot of experience in dealing with the dispute cases. So I have reasons to think that they will handle the situation appropriately. If it doesn't work out, you go to the area editor and eventually editor-in-chief. And even if it doesn't work out, if you are talking about IEEE, for instance, a society, IEEE Communication Society, that society has its own vice president for periodicals, for instance. And then even that is not sufficient. You can go to the ombuds person. And you know, in the society level and even in IEEE level. So even above editor, there are 6-7 layers in IEEE, but you should be patient. You know, it is like you have an accident. So you were just sitting, I mean, stopping at the red light, some drunk driver came and, you know, hit you. You are 100% right in this case. You don't have any fault, 0%, but you can't just go and punch the other driver, right? There is an etiquette. Unfortunately, this situation happened. So you have to act in a civilized manner. You call police and, you know, there is a procedure. The fact that you are right in the beginning doesn't give you the right to do inappropriate things. This is what I am trying to say. There is a comment in the chat box. Okay, so some, people are, it is already 12 noon in Ottawa. Feel free to leave and I will finish in the next 5-10 minutes and post this in my YouTube channel. There is a question, some reviewers ask the authors to cite. Yeah, this is the thing I hate most. And unfortunately, this is happening increasingly often due to this, perhaps in part, stress of everyone trying to increase their citation count. It is a very ugly practice. Actually, I almost never get angry with a reviewer, even if they misinterpret my paper. The only instance that I get angry is a reviewer is asking to cite a few papers, and you check those papers, they are by the same author, and the reviewer himself or herself. It is very annoying. Now, if the work is relevant, you might choose to cite them, but in some cases, they may not be even relevant. They might be in the same general area, but not relevant to the paper. In those cases, feel free to report it to the editor, and editor will take the necessary actions. Now I'm moving to a next section. Any further questions here? Okay, so let us quickly wrap this up. Revision process. So you should have a positive attitude because you are given an opportunity to revise your paper, meaning that an opportunity to enhance the paper. Now, if the reviewer didn't understand your work properly, keep in mind that the readers may not be able to understand your work either, no matter how strongly you feel that you explained it properly. So just go and try to present it in a better way, in a different way, if necessary. Have some redundancy, that is the same messages repeated elsewhere in the document. But once again, take this as an opportunity. If the reviewer didn't understand, why didn't she or he understand the paper? Remember, the onus is on you. Before showing, or pointing to other people, point to yourself. Yes, don't take the revision lightly. Be diligent, be thorough. Response letter should be prepared very carefully. In some cases, the response letter may end up being longer than the paper itself. A golden rule here is that for each and every comment of each and every reviewer, there should better be an action in the paper. So you shouldn't be really dismissive of the reviewer saying that, oh, this point, it's already in the paper. Again, section 3.b.1, sentence number 3, that is answering your concern. That is not good in my view, although it might be correct that that particular sentence is basically answering the review comment. So what you need to do in that case is, it is there, but perhaps it wasn't written in a clear way. You go and rewrite the sentence, the same message, or add a footnote, or put a comma in your sentence, as simple as putting a comma, but at least you have done something. Reviewer would appreciate that. So in your response letter, you should reproduce each comment of each reviewer. So here is the comment, cut and paste, a discussion about that, and then action item in the paper. So each comment, it is a triple level addressing. Once again, reproduce the comment, your comments, your explanation, and eventually basically action in the paper. Okay, I think we are almost at the end. After paper is accepted, I think it is a good idea to post this in online portals like Archive and ResearchGate, although some people might have different views here. The students should always consult with their supervisors. In my group, I generally recommend to put posting the paper in these portals at the time of submission, especially if you are very confident about the work, you did your due diligence, and you have reasons to think that it can go through the review process. It might be just better to post it right after the submission for increased visibility and early visibility. And once the paper is accepted and it appears in IEEE Explore, for instance, or any other publisher's portal, I see more often these days people announce their paper in social media. I think it's a good practice. I don't do it myself for a variety of reasons. I'm not very active in social media, but especially for junior researchers, I think it is a good way to publicize your work. Here we come, concluding remarks. This pandemic has been painful and it is still continuing. Obviously, it is, we don't know when it will end. But one advantage of the of course, this is an unexpected advantage, and it is just one advantage out of, in comparison to so many disadvantages. It taught us how to do research in online mode with online meetings and so on. And this facilitates long distance collaboration. In my group, I think we have taken the advantage of this very properly. In the last year, my group's productivity has increased substantially, the number of papers coming out of my group, and a non-insignificant number of them are through these collaborations. Whether the student is in Ottawa or on the other side of the world, I meet the student online anyway. So these remote collaborations are as viable as working with my own student. I can't meet him or her anyway in person. Just moving to another direction, try to learn from each paper experience. This is a long journey from the submission until the paper appears. So many things happen. Sometimes you submit more than once. And there are lots of lessons to be learned. Reflect on them. And if you think some moves were less than optimal and some were incorrect moves, try to avoid them for your next paper. Try to learn from your experience. This third bullet is extremely important. This psychological and emotional strength is crucial. I can't really stress the importance sufficiently. Even with the people in the audience here, with many of you, I have papers, obviously. And I remember instances that you were depressed and you don't want to continue. You have the feeling that this work is worthless and so on and so forth. And then we work together and eventually the paper gets published. And not only that, published in a good venue, and we are proud of that publication. So yes, it is understandable that it is a big toll after a year of hard work. That paper produced after a year, gets rejected, but we should really continue working. We can't put aside all that investment. We do whatever necessary. If we genuinely think that that wasn't a good paper anyway, we got the important or whatever is important from that work and build on that and make a totally new paper, or if it is just some misunderstandings, less than ideal presentation, or less results, whatever, we work on the paper and submit the new version. So a rejection is not the end of the world. Probably this is kind of the most important element in this entire talk. You should enjoy and value your research. If you don't enjoy and you don't value, just don't do it. You are wasting your time, you are wasting my time, you are wasting reviewers' time, you are wasting resources of the system. Research can be very fulfilling. I love research. I was just talking about some issues that happened in the last few days about me, but I came to my office at after 7 a.m. this morning to prepare to make the final touches to this talk. I do it because I like what I do. It might be very fulfilling. It is a great profession to be a researcher. So enjoying research is that part, but just don't do research because someone told you to work in that area. That is the advantage in academia. In industry, perhaps you have limited room to maneuver, but in academia, we pick and choose topics. Pick something that is of interest to you. Anyhow, I think I'll leave it there. There is a question here. Actually, I will stop share, perhaps. If the paper is published in Explore, then we put it in ResearchGate. Does this violate the copyright? Yes. Fadi, my understanding is that once IEEE edits the paper and produces the final product, it is IEEE's basically product, so they have the copyright. But remember that final version after the paper gets accepted that you sent to IEEE, that is yours. So don't post in ResearchGate the version in IEEE Explore. That is, I think, a no-no, because the copyright issue will kick in. But the file, the PDF, let us say you sent to IEEE after the paper gets accepted, that you can post in Archive and ResearchGate. Okay, so another question here. What is your opinion about submitting to a new IEEE journal that is not indexed, but the journal has a by all means. There is a rule that indexing takes 3-4 years. If it is a good journal, if you have reasons to think that it's a good journal, this indexing issue really means nothing for me. Absolutely nothing. A good chunk of indexed journals are low quality anyway. I don't publish in them personally. So what really matters is you just have to value the journal, and then you just go ahead and submit. After a few years, the indexing will come, and then you will know all the bibliometrics about the journal. Okay, any other questions, comments? Well, I have to apologize once again. I had some issues with my eyes, and therefore I pretty much closed my eyes during the talk. But I think the main message was delivered. So I will stop recording. Thank you very much for your presence and the lively discussion.